The Liberal government is set to introduce a new hate crime legislation, resurrecting civil liberties concerns that were present with the Liberals' Online Harms Act.
The Liberal government continues to dodge questions on designating left-wing extremists such as Antifa groups as listed terrorist entities.
Canada's interim parliamentary budget officer warns that Prime Minister Mark Carney's vague promises of reining in spending are meaningless without clear fiscal guardrails. Hello Canada, it's Thursday, September 18th. This is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Geoff Knight.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Justice Minister Sean Fraser revealed Tuesday the Liberal government is set to table new, quote, hate legislation within days, potentially resurrecting elements of the controversial, now defunct Bill C-63, which civil liberties advocates decried as an attack on free speech. Fraser said, quote, "We expect to have potentially several pieces of legislation during this fall sitting. The first that we intend to introduce will make good on the campaign commitments that we've put forward with respect to obstruction, intimidation of those attending religious institutions or buildings. We intend to take it a step further to address hate more broadly in our communities." He said the legislation would be tabled within days. Fraser said bail reform, tougher sentences for violent crimes, and online protections for children will follow later this fall. Conservative MP Larry Brock previously showcased that even the government admits regulations could take years to develop. Brock said of former Justice Minister Arif Virani, quote, "Even the Justice Minister himself, the bill's biggest advocate, the cheerleader to this failed Liberal government, admitted that it would take years for this bureaucracy to create and enforce regulations." Virani previously defended the bill, insisting some provisions could take effect quickly. So Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, essentially died with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's prorogation of Parliament, but it had passed some readings in the House of Commons. However, it wasn't put into law, and it seems like the Liberals are attempting to revive some portion of that. It's not clear what this bill they're talking about will actually include, whether it's just a replica or it has alterations or an entirely different thing altogether. But the latest attempt of them introducing some form of hate speech legislation was Bill C-63, which attempted to reintroduce or revive a controversial section called Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act. And that was struck down by the Harper government because it essentially was found to violate people's freedom of expression, and it ran into all sorts of problems and abuses. So, Geoff, what were some of the main concerns from civil liberties advocates about the Liberals' previously so-called, online hate speech legislation, Bill C-63?
Yeah, Cosmin, civil liberties advocates raised significant concerns about Bill C-63, with the Canadian Civil Liberties Association warning it could have a negative impact on free expression, as individuals might self-censor due to vague hate speech definitions. Jordan Peterson criticized the bill as Orwellian, arguing it would empower bureaucrats to police thought, particularly targeting dissenting views on gender identity, a stance he voiced during a National Post interview in March 2024. Reflecting his ongoing opposition to related laws like Bill C-16. Michael Geist, a University of Ottawa law professor, highlighted the bill's broad amendments to the Criminal Code and Canadian Human Rights Act, noting they risked draconian enforcement with potential life sentences for hate propaganda and a lowered threshold for online hate complaints. The British Columbia Civil Liberties Association expressed alarm that Part 2 of the bill would harm vulnerable groups it aims to protect by fostering fear of reprisal, further fueling advocacy against its revival. Public Safety Minister Gary Anandasangari and his department are dodging questions on whether Canada would follow former U.S. President Donald Trump's pledge to label the extremist far-left group Antifa as a terrorist entity. Trump announced Monday that he would be 100% behind designating Antifa and other violent extremist left-wing groups as domestic terrorist organizations. All of this, of course, in the wake of the left-wing assassination of U.S. conservative commentator Charlie Kirk last week.
Do you plan on designating Antifa finally a domestic terror organization?
Well, it's something I would do, yeah. If I have support from the people back here, I think we'd start with Pam, I think. But I would, if you give me, I would do that 100%, and others also, by the way. But Antifa is terrible.
Are there other groups that you can think of?
There are other groups, yeah, there are other groups. We have some pretty radical groups, and they got away with murder. And also, I've been speaking to the Attorney General about bringing RICO against some of the people that you've been reading about that have been putting up millions and millions of dollars for agitation. These aren't protests.
True North asked Public Safety Canada, Anandasangari, and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre if they would support designating Antifa as a terrorist group, or to comment on Trump's statement. Neither Anandasangari nor Poilievre responded to True North's request for comment before the deadline. Public Safety Canada, however, responded by listing the process of how an organization becomes a listed terror entity, but did not confirm whether it would be following Trump's lead in looking into designating Antifa as a terror group. A spokesperson said, quote, "The safety of Canadians is a top priority for the Government of Canada, and Canadian intelligence, security, and law enforcement agencies continuously monitor threats and implement measures to address them, including through listing under the Criminal Code's list of terrorist entities. The decision to list an entity results from a rigorous process based on evidence, intelligence, and the law." Public Safety Canada, however, responded by listing the process of how an organization becomes a listed terror entity, but did not confirm whether it will be following Trump's lead in looking into designating Antifa as a terror group. So, Cosmin, we've covered a lot of Antifa violence at True North in the past. What are some of the examples of Antifa-driven groups engaging in political violence in Canada over the last few years?
Yeah, so we've covered Antifa violence quite a lot, actually, and it's honestly pretty striking when you look at the incidents over the past few years. Montreal, for instance, Antifa members there earlier this year have targeted a lot of events because it seems to be a hub for anarchist and Antifa activity. Back in June, they hit a March for Life gathering with smoke bombs, firecrackers, and these loud sound devices, basically trying to intimidate anyone in attendance, including kids and the elderly. And that's just one example. So you also see them smash shop windows, burn vehicles, and essentially with near impunity because a lot of them get away and don't get arrested. So vandalism of property is a very frequent tactic that they engage in. And it isn't new. They've been happening repeatedly, especially on May Day and other protest days. We saw it flare up during the Black Lives Matter movement, during the pandemic. There's even a group called Resistance Internationaliste that claimed responsibility for several bombings, but this is back in 2004 and 2010. Additionally, you see online, they openly plan jeopardizing infrastructure, including pipelines, other critical things like there's guides on anarchist websites how to mess with train tracks and all sorts of different infrastructure. So yeah, this extends beyond Montreal. You see it in Hamilton. You see it in BC. There's a lot of anarchist sympathies among the First Nations movement, the Land Back movement, as well as the environmental movement. As Prime Minister Mark Carney's government faces mounting criticism over its financial mismanagement, Canada's interim parliamentary budget officer admits he has no idea whether the Liberals have any, quote, firm fiscal anchors guiding Ottawa's spending. Dzsurdzsa told MPs on the House of Commons Government Operations Committee Tuesday, quote, "I don't know if the government currently has fiscal anchors. That, of course, causes the people I work with a considerable degree of concern." Jacques noted that previous Liberal governments set targets like capping the annual deficit at 1% of GDP and maintaining a declining debt-to-GDP ratio. He said, quote, "It's unclear where those stand," noting the current government has not reiterated them. Carney has pledged to present a budget that separates operating and capital spending, promising to balance the operating side within 3 years, while finding 15% savings across departments. But Jacques warned that with no clear definition of a, quote, operating budget, it is impossible to assess the likelihood of or probability of the government hitting any fiscal target. His remarks echoed a summer report from former PBO Yves Giraud and came as Government House Leader Stephen McKinnon acknowledged this week that the next deficit will be, quote, substantial. Conservatives seized on the testimony. In a statement Tuesday, the party said the PBO confirmed what Canadians have suspected. Carney's plan to, quote, spend less and invest more is pure speculation, the statement wrote. The Conservatives warned a lack of clarity heightens business uncertainty and could lead to higher borrowing costs if Ottawa plays, quote, fiscal games with how it reports debt and deficits. So, Geoff, it seems Canadians really don't have any idea of the fiscal situation for Ottawa. We still don't have a federal budget to gauge spending on. What do we know about Carney's proposed spending this year?
Well, Cosmin, while no federal budget has been tabled, reports indicate Carney's government plans to allocate significant funds towards housing, with an estimated $10 billion earmarked for affordable housing initiatives in 2025. Military spending is also set to increase, with a proposed $5 billion boost to defense budgets in 2025 to modernize equipment and expand personnel, aligning with McKinnon's mention of substantial investments, as noted in a Department of National Defense leaked memo. Economic expansion efforts include a $3 billion investment in green infrastructure projects, part of Carney's Spend Less and Invest More pledge, though details remain vague, according to Infrastructure Canada's preliminary 2025 spending outlines. Despite the promise to find 15% savings across departments, no specific cuts have been detailed, leaving uncertainty about how these investments will be financed, especially with the acknowledged substantial deficit.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.